The sonar pinged once, then twice. Then it screamed. Captain William Ironhand Carter stood motionless in the control room of the USS Phantom, his calloused hands gripping the edge of the navigation table. The sound that filled the submarine wasn't supposed to exist. Not here. Not 300 meters beneath the Arctic ice shelf, where nothing lived and nothing moved. "Sir, I'm picking up a metallic signature," sonar technician Hayes called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Distance, 400 meters, bearing 090. Christ, sir, it's a submarine." Carter's jaw tightened. In 48 hours, they hadn't encountered a single vessel. The Arctic Ocean was a graveyard of silence, exactly as Command had promised. This mission was supposed to be routine: map the underwater topography, test the new navigation systems, and return home. Clean, simple, safe. But nothing about this moment felt safe. "Identification?" Carter asked, his voice steady despite the ice forming in his veins. Hayes hesitated, his fingers dancing across the sonar display. The green lines pulsed rhythmically, painting a picture that shouldn't exist. "Soviet, sir. Definitely Soviet. But the signature, it's old. Very old." Carter moved to the sonar station, his boots silent against the metal floor. The temperature inside the Phantom had dropped 3 degrees in the last hour. Condensation formed on every surface, and the crew's breath hung in the air like ghosts. The sonar image was clear now. A submarine, roughly the same size as the Phantom, rested at a 45-degree angle against an underwater ice formation. Its hull was intact, but something about its position suggested violence. A collision, perhaps, or a desperate emergency surfacing attempt that had gone horribly wrong. "How old?" Carter demanded. Hayes ran the signature through the classification database. The answer came back in seconds, and the color drained from his face. "Sir, 1945. The signature matches a Soviet K-class submarine, but that's impossible. There's no record of Soviet subs operating in this sector during the war." Carter felt his pulse quicken, but his expression remained carved from stone. 40 years. That submarine had been down here for 40 years, entombed in ice and darkness, hidden from the world. "Any signs of life?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Negative, sir. No heat signatures, no electrical activity. It's dead." But even as Hayes spoke the words, something inside Carter stirred. A feeling he'd learned to trust during the war. The instinct that had kept him alive when so many others had died. This wasn't over. "Prepare for visual reconnaissance," Carter ordered. "I want eyes on that wreck." His executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, stepped forward. Webb was young, ambitious, and strictly by the book. Everything Carter had once been before the war had taught him that the book was sometimes written by men who'd never faced the impossible. "Sir, our orders are clear," Webb said carefully. "Survey and return. Command didn't authorize any deviations." Carter turned to face him, and Webb instinctively took half a step back. There was something in the captain's eyes, something that had earned him the nickname Ironhand during the darkest days of the Pacific War. Not cruelty, but absolute unyielding determination. "Mr. Webb, that vessel has been down here for 4 decades. If there's intelligence value, charts, codes, technology, Command will want to know. We investigate." Webb opened his mouth to protest, then thought better of it. He nodded sharply. "Aye, sir." 20 minutes later, Carter stood in the forward observation dome, staring through the reinforced glass into the absolute blackness of the Arctic deep. The Phantom's external lights cut through the water like surgical blades, illuminating a landscape of ice and ancient stone. And there it was. The Soviet submarine hung suspended in the frozen water, its hull encased in a cocoon of ice that glittered like diamonds in the harsh light. The vessel's conning tower was crushed, its periscope bent at an unnatural angle. Long streamers of ice hung from its diving planes like frozen tears. But it was the forward section that made Carter's blood run cold. Through the ice, clearly visible through the submarine's cracked observation ports, were faces. Human faces. Frozen mid-scream, mouths open, eyes wide with terror. The crew hadn't died peacefully. They died in absolute panic, clawing at the glass, desperate for escape that never came. "Jesus Christ," Hayes whispered beside him. Carter said nothing. He'd seen death before, had ordered men to their deaths during the war, but this was different. These men had been trapped, buried alive in metal and ice, their final moments preserved like insects in amber. "Sir, look at this." Hayes pointed to one of the frozen figures visible through the nearest porthole. The man's hand was pressed against the glass, and even through the thick layer of ice, Carter could see something clutched in his frozen fingers. A photograph. A woman and 2 children smiling at the camera. Carter turned away, his throat tight. "Bring us closer. I want a full hull inspection." As the Phantom maneuvered into position, the external lights swept across the Soviet submarine's length. That's when they saw it. The forward torpedo tubes were open, empty. Whatever weapons this submarine had carried, it had fired them before dying. The radio crackled to life, and Communications Officer Riley's voice filled the observation dome. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission." Carter frowned. "From where? We're the only vessel within 500 kilometers. "That's just it, sir. The signal is coming from the wreck." Impossible. Hayes had confirmed no electrical activity. No power. No life. Yet even as Carter processed this information, the lights inside the Soviet submarine flickered once, then again, then steadied into a dim, sickly yellow glow. The frozen crew remained motionless, their faces still locked in eternal horror. But the submarine was alive. "Get me that transmission," Carter ordered, his voice sharp. Static filled the speakers, punctuated by a rhythmic clicking that sounded almost like Morse code. Then a voice emerged from the white noise, faint, distorted, speaking in Russian. But beneath the words, there was something else, a sound that shouldn't exist, breathing. Hayes was already translating, his Russian rusty but functional. "It's a distress call, automated," it says. "Project Koshai. Containment failure. Do not board. Do not approach. Cargo must remain sealed." The message repeated over and over, the breathing sound growing louder with each iteration. Carter's mind raced. Project Koshai. He'd heard whispers of it during intelligence briefings. A Soviet experiment, something involving extreme cold preservation, but the details had been classified above his clearance level. "Mr. Webb, contact command. Full encryption. Tell them what we've found." Webb moved to comply, but before he could reach the radio room, every light on the Phantom went dark. The sudden silence was absolute. Even the ever-present hum of the nuclear reactor seemed to pause, as if the submarine itself was holding its breath. Emergency lighting kicked in after 3 eternal seconds, bathing everything in crimson. "Report," Carter barked. "Electrical surge, sir," Chief Engineer Kowalski called from below. "Something just hit us with an electromagnetic pulse. Systems are rebooting, but..." The sonar screamed again, this time so loud that Hayes ripped off his headset, blood trickling from his left ear. "Multiple contacts," he shouted. "Dozens of them, all around us. They just appeared out of nowhere." Carter rushed to the sonar display. The screen showed at least 30 objects, each roughly man-sized, circling the Phantom in a perfect spiral pattern. They weren't moving like fish or marine life. They were moving with purpose, with intelligence, and they were all coming from the Soviet wreck. Through the observation dome, Carter saw them. Figures in the water, swimming toward the Phantom with unnatural speed. At first, he thought they were wearing old-style diving suits, the kind the Soviets had used in the 1940s. But as they drew closer, the external lights revealed the truth. They weren't wearing suits. They were still frozen, encased in ice, yet somehow moving through the water as if the laws of physics no longer applied to them. Their eyes were open, staring with the same terror that had marked their deaths, but now those eyes had purpose. They were looking at the Phantom, looking at Carter. "Emergency dive," he ordered. "Take us down, now!" But even as the Phantom's engines roared to life, Carter knew it was too late. The frozen figures were too fast, too numerous. They swarmed the submarine like angry wasps, their ice-encrusted hands hammering against the hull with impossible strength. The sound was deafening, a staccato drumbeat of frozen fists against metal that echoed through every compartment. Crew members stumbled, covering their ears, some crying out in pain as the vibrations seemed to bypass their ears and resonate directly in their skulls. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the pounding stopped. Carter stood in the observation dome, his heart hammering, and watched as the frozen figures arranged themselves in formation around the Phantom. They weren't attacking anymore. They were waiting. The radio crackled back to life, but this time the voice wasn't speaking Russian. It was speaking English, with a slight Midwestern accent that sounded achingly familiar. "William!" Carter's blood turned to ice water. That voice. He knew that voice. "William, can you hear me?" It was impossible. Lieutenant James Morrison had died in 1944, killed when their submarine had been depth-charged off the coast of Okinawa. Carter had held him as he died, had watched the life fade from his eyes, had delivered the eulogy at his memorial service. "James," Carter whispered, his voice barely audible. "You shouldn't have come here, William. This place, it changes things. It preserves them. Project Koshi wasn't about weapons or technology. It was about life, about keeping something alive that should have died." The frozen figures outside the observation dome parted, and through the gap, Carter saw Morrison. He was encased in ice just like the others, his naval uniform still crisp despite 4 decades underwater. But his eyes were alive, aware, and filled with a sadness that transcended death. "They promised us immortality," Morrison's voice continued through the speakers. "The Soviets. They promised we'd survive anything, overcome any depth, any pressure, any cold. And they were right. We survived. But survival isn't living, William. It's just continuing." Webb appeared at Carter's shoulder, his face pale. "Sir, command is on the line. They want an immediate report." Carter didn't move, couldn't tear his eyes away from Morrison's frozen face. "What do they want, James? Why did you activate?" "Because you're going to make the same choice I made," Morrison replied. "They're going to give you an order, William. They're going to tell you to destroy this wreck, to make sure nobody ever finds out about Project Koshi. And you're going to have to decide. Do you follow orders, or do you save the men trapped in here?" "They're already dead," Webb interjected, his voice hard. "Whatever this is, it's not salvation. It's an abomination." Morrison's laugh echoed through the speakers, bitter and ancient. "Dead? Look at me, William. Look at all of us. We're not dead. We're frozen, suspended, and there's a difference. Inside this ice, we can still think, still feel, still hope. For 40 years, we've been hoping someone would find us. Someone who could break the ice, set us free." Carter's hand moved to his sidearm without conscious thought. Every instinct screamed danger, but beneath that, he felt something else, pity. Morrison had been his friend, his brother in arms. If their positions were reversed, wouldn't he want someone to try? The radio crackled again, this time with a new voice. "Admiral Harrison, Commander of Pacific Fleet Operations. Captain Carter, this is Compactfell T. We have reviewed the situation via your automated uplink. You are hereby ordered to arm all torpedoes and destroy the foreign wreck. No survivors, no salvage. Execute immediately." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Carter looked at the frozen figures surrounding his submarine. 37 men, according to the Soviet submarine's configuration. 37 souls trapped between life and death, preserved in a prison of ice and water and failed promises. "Sir," Webb's voice was quiet but firm. "The order is clear." "How long?" Carter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir?" "How long would it take to surface this wreck? To bring them up slowly, safely, so the ice could melt without killing them?" Webb stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Captain, you can't be serious. Those things aren't human anymore. They're sailors," Carter interrupted, his voice hardening. "They're sailors who followed orders, who trusted their government, and who were betrayed. Just like we'd be betraying them if we blow them to pieces because it's convenient." "It's not about convenience," Webb shot back. "It's about security. If the Soviets discover we found this wreck, if they learn we know about Project Koshi—" "The Soviets already know," Morrison's voice cut through the speakers. "They've known for 40 years. They just couldn't recover us without revealing the project. So they left us here, abandoned us. Just like your Admiral Harrison wants to abandon us now." The radio crackled with Harrison's voice again, sharper this time. "Captain Carter, you have your orders. Execute them now, or I will relieve you of command." Carter closed his eyes. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like the ocean itself. Follow orders and murder 37 men who'd already suffered 4 decades of frozen hell. Or disobey, risk his career, his crew, perhaps even an international incident, for the slim chance of saving them. When he opened his eyes, he saw his reflection in the observation dome glass, superimposed over Morrison's frozen face. 2 sailors, 2 choices, separated by time and ice but connected by the fundamental question that defined every commander. What price is acceptable for following orders? "Mr. Webb," Carter said quietly, "prepare the rescue submersible. We're going to bring them home." Webb didn't move. "Sir, I cannot allow you to—" "That wasn't a request, Lieutenant Commander. That was an order." The radio erupted with Admiral Harrison's voice, but Carter reached up and switched it off. Whatever consequences were coming, they could wait. Right now, 37 men needed him to be something more than a good soldier. They needed him to be human. Outside the observation dome, the frozen figures slowly lowered their arms in what might have been gratitude or might have been surrender. Morrison's ice-encased face remained motionless, but through the frozen water, Carter could have sworn he saw tears. The ice around the Soviet submarine began to crack, releasing bubbles that rose toward the distant surface like prayers. And deep in the Arctic darkness, where the temperature hovered at -40 and the pressure could crush steel, Captain William Ironhand Carter prepared to save 37 ghosts from a prison that should never have existed. But as the Phantom's rescue systems activated, as the crew scrambled to prepare for an extraction that defied every protocol they'd ever learned, Carter couldn't shake one final thought. What if Morrison was wrong? What if they weren't saving these men? What if they were releasing them?